I rise today to speak out against a bill that is misguided, a bill that stands against everything that America represents, a bill that suggests that it will protect Americans when in fact it will protect Americans less. Now, from our founding, our principles have been guided by core values of equality and fairness, freedom and tolerance. And in turn, we have honored the many, many ways that immigrants have contributed to this country since its inception. Yet the other side of the aisle is once again engaged in a stubborn, relentless, and shameful assault against immigrants. And as the son of immigrants myself, it's hard not to take offense at the anti-immigrant rhetoric we're hearing from their presidential candidates. It is unacceptable, deplorable, and should be renounced by every American. We are witnessing the most overtly nativist, xenophobic campaign in modern U.S. history. We've hit a new low with the extraordinarily hateful rhetoric that diminishes immigrants' contributions to American history and particularly demonizes the Latino community by labeling Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals. The Republican leading in the polls actually launched his presidential candidacy by attacking immigrants, saying, and I quote, "They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. Please, please spare me." It's senseless and false. Yet some of my Senate colleagues have decided to jump on the GOP's fear-mongering bandwagon, seeking to blindly stamp millions of hard-working, law-abiding immigrant families as criminals and rapists. And that's really why we are here today. Because that anti-immigrant rhetoric has made its way to the Senate floor, courtesy of Donald Trump, and some Republicans eager to capitalize on this rhetoric for their own political gain. This is nothing more than an offensive anti-immigrant bill, another effort to demonize those who risked everything for a better life for themselves and their children, those who left with no choice but to flee persecution and violence or else face a certain death. That's what we are debating here today. Those are the individuals this legislation seeks to brand as criminal. This bill does nothing more than instigate fear and divide our nation. Now, supporters of this bill may say that it is in response to tragedy like what happened in San Francisco, and what happened in San Francisco was a tragedy. But such tragedies will not be prevented by this legislation, but real immigration reform. I'm happy to have that debate, a real debate, an honest and compassionate debate, a debate the country deserves. But that's not what's happening in this bill. The title of the bill asserts that it will protect Americans. Well, to be clear, this bill will not protect Americans because it second-guesses decisions made by local law enforcement around the country about how to best police their own communities and ensure public safety. What's worse, this bill mandates local law enforcement to take on federal immigration enforcement duties by threatening to strip away funding from as many as 300 local jurisdictions from programs like the Community Development Block Grant, the Community-Oriented Policing Services, the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program, programs that directly help our towns and communities. The CDBG program grows local economies, improves the quality of life for families. It has assisted hundreds of millions of people with low and moderate incomes, stabilized neighborhoods, provided affordable housing, improved the safety and quality of life of American citizens. The Cops on the Beat grant funds salaries and benefits for police officers who serve us every day by keeping our communities safe. And they deserve better than being dragged into partisan politics. Now, my colleague from Louisiana seeks to strip funding from localities that undertake the balancing of public safety considerations and refuse to act as immigration and customs enforcement agents. But this bill goes even further than that. The bill isn't content with taking discretion away from local communities, it takes it away from the judicial branch. It adds new mandatory minimums when, as a nation, we're trying to move away from that approach. The new mandatory minimum sentences would have a crippling financial impact with no evidence that they would actually deter future violations of the law. They could cost American taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think that deserves a serious, thoughtful debate in the Judiciary Committee with expert testimony on whether this really makes us safer or we're throwing away hard-earned taxpayers' dollars. But we won't even get that debate because this bill was fast-tracked as a Republican priority, and it didn't even go through the regular committee process. The U.S. Senate cannot nurture an environment that demonizes and dehumanizes Latinos and the entire immigrant community. By threatening to strip CDBG funding from cities, Senate Republicans are saying it's okay to withhold funding from economically vulnerable American citizens, senior citizens, veterans, and children to promote their anti-immigrant agenda. That it's okay to cut cops funding, which has long promoted public safety through community policing. A one-size-fits-all approach that punishes state and local law enforcement agencies that engage in well-established community policing practices just doesn't make sense. Local communities and local law enforcement are better judges than Congress of what keeps their communities safe. Police need cooperation from the community to do their jobs. That's why over the past several years, hundreds of localities across our nation, with the support of some of the toughest police chiefs and sheriffs, have limited their involvement in federal immigration enforcement out of concerns for community safety and violations of Fourth Amendment. They need witnesses and victims to be able to come forward without fear of recrimination because of their immigrant status. And fear of deportation should never be a barrier to reporting crime or seeking help from the police. This fear undermines trust between law enforcement and the communities they protect and creates a chilling effect. These policies were put in place because local jurisdictions don't want to do ICE's job for them. Effective policing cannot be achieved by forcing an unwanted role upon the police by threat of sanctions or withholding assistance, especially at a time when law enforcement agencies are strengthening police-community relations. Furthermore, why do my Republican colleagues believe they know better than the local towns and citizens who live this day in and day out? They talk endlessly about decentralizing government, giving the power back to local communities, but not this time. It's no wonder that this bill is opposed by law enforcement, including the Fraternal Order of Police, the Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, immigrant and Latino rights organizations, faith groups, domestic violence groups, among others. This bill is not a real solution to our broken immigration system. Bottom line is that we need comprehensive immigration reform. We passed bipartisan legislation in 2013, but we haven't had a real discussion in Congress for over 2 years. A recent poll found that 74% of Americans overall said that undocumented immigrants should be given a pathway to stay legally. That included 66% of Republicans, 74% of independents, 80% of Democrats who supported a pathway to legal status for undocumented immigrants. And that bipartisan support is not new. Comprehensive immigration reform previously passed in the Senate brought millions of people out of the shadows who had to prove their identity, pass a criminal background check, pay taxes, provide an earned path to citizenship so ICE could focus on the people who were true public safety threats. The bill also increased penalties for repeat border crossers. It included $46 billion in new resources, including no fewer than 38,000 trained, full-time, active Border Patrol agents deployed, stationed along the southern border. It increased the real GDP of our country by more than 3% in 2023 and 5.4% in 2033, an increase of roughly $700 billion in the first 10 years and $1.4 trillion in the second 10. It would have reduced the federal deficit by $197 billion over the next decade and by another $700 billion in the following. That's almost $1 trillion in deficit spending reductions by giving 11 million people a pathway to citizenship. That was a real solution. That's the type of reform we need. That, in fact, is the opportunity that existed. Unfortunately, the other body in the House of Representatives did not even have a vote. And to the extent that Americans are less safe, it is because of their inaction, that we are less safe today. So, Mr. President, tragedies should not be used to scapegoat immigrants. They should not be used to erode trust between law enforcement and our communities. We cannot let fear drive our policy making. So let us actively and collectively resist the demagoguery that threatens to shape American policy making for the worse. I believe a vote to proceed is a vote against the Latino and immigrant communities of our country, and I hope that on a bipartisan basis we can reject that. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.